Welcome, Exiles, to the Day 2 update to the Spark Inquisitor. I gotta be honest with you guys, Crackling Lance I think is gonna be better, maybe single target in the big boss arenas, but Spark just feels so much better mapping, so I've just been playing with it. Still leveling Crackling Lance. I might just have it as a skill I can swap into for single target on boss fights, like the arenas where the bosses are in a huge arena, and it's just really bad for Spark because Spark kind of needs you to get a little bit of bounces off walls, get a little extra hits for its single target to come through, which happens in most arenas. But for the Syrian Exile and the Eater of Worlds, their arenas are pretty big. There's a couple other boss fights where the arenas are really pretty big and you don't get to bounce off many walls, and Spark kind of falls off in those sort of situations. So maybe I'll keep Crackling Lance in just for single target and boss fights like those. Speaking of which, I did both of those today, and it was a cakewalk for this build. I'm going to go into why it was a cakewalk for the build, but the moral of the story is we could basically tank all of their attacks except for one attack the Syrian Exarch does. He'll say Incinerator, and he'll be making a big bomb attack. We can't quite tank that one. And then the Eater of Worlds, there is a drowning attack, which I didn't even know it was happening, but it's basically a thing that just like insta-kills you. If you let the ball sit on you, it drowns you, your screen will go dark. You'll know what I'm talking about when you do the fight. And then there's some other big bomb attack that the Eater of Worlds does that I didn't try to tank, but I think it would be similar to the Syrian Exarch attack where it's a big bomb attack and we can't quite tank it. That's my theory. Now, why are we so tanky? We actually have 86 max all-res, and I have some plans in my head to get this closer to 87, 88 even. And the way we're doing this is one of the brand new jewels, Melding of the Flesh. You've probably heard of it. It was one of the jewels teased that I thought was really strong, but apparently no one else thinks is strong because it has a big downside. Its downside is, hey, you have minus 70 res. And it can roll all the way up to minus 80. Best case scenario is minus 70. That's a pretty big downside. The reason we can make it work so well in our build is we get a lot, and I mean a lot, of free res throughout the tree. For example, in this cluster of Sanctuary, we get about 24 all-res. We get another 12 all-res here. We can get 15 all-res in the Elemental Mastery. We get 15 all-res from Alira. We get 5 all-res from Cruel Preparation. There's a lot of nodes on our tree that's just like, here, have some all-res. Here, have some all-res. So even though our gearing isn't like super OP res-wise, if we have 1 Purity of Ice, Aegis Aurora, and just a little bit of decent res on our gear, we can actually cap and overcome this downside and end up with 86 max all-res. Because we get, I think it's about 5 from the shield, we get 5 from Purity Ice, and then I have like 20% aura effect, so it goes up to 6 max res. Hence, we have 86 max all res because it makes your fire and lightning resistances, or it makes basically whatever your max res is, whichever one's the highest, it makes the other max reses match that. And potentially, if I haven't really been able to do many of these, but the Syrian Exarch currency, you can actually get plus to cold res or plus to max all res. I think up to 3, maybe even 2. Is probably good enough, but you can roll that on a chest, which would give us 87, 88 max all res, and you can also roll max res on a glove, and that could take us all the way to 90 max all res. This is just an extremely strong defensive layer to have in a build, and I wasn't really planning on doing this because I thought this jewel would be expensive. I thought it would be very expensive. I thought it was going to be a rare drop. I thought people were going to be competing to use it, but apparently I'm the only one that thinks that, because these things are 5C, there's 70 of them listed. It's clearly probably a pretty common drop of the Eater of Worlds. So I was super happy to throw this into the build because it makes the build so much more tanky. Now granted, when I was throwing this into it and getting it into the build, trying to make the resistances work, I dropped a little bit of damage, but I'm not worried about it. Nebulous, I think, is going to end up tanking in price as more people start running Cortexes. The market's going to get flooded with Nebulous, and we can swap into a Nebulous for a super high damage Scepter that's not going to be too expensive. So I'm excited about getting some high-end damage uniques for the build, like Nebulous, and stuff like that, because we're going to be tanky and we're going to feel good. I did Eater of Worlds and Syrian Exarch on a level 19 Spark. You know, I don't really have much qualities on my gem. I guess I have quality on Pinpoint, but like, it's really not that strong a gearing we have going on, and I'm pretty confident I'm going to be able to do Elder, Shaper, Uber Elder, Maven with this current setup, and we're going to get more DPS in it as we get things like Nebulous, as I level up a few more times, maybe get the gear a little bit better. But so far, I'm very pleased with how the build is coming together in terms of its viability for some of this endgame content and where we've been able to take it so far with our relatively not super stellar, just kind of basic rare gear. Now, I actually want to go ahead and showcase a Altered Distant Memory. This is the first synthesis map I got, so I figured this would be a decent showcase for right now, and just to verify for you guys that I did take down the Eater of Worlds and the Syrian Exarch. There's the Watchstones right there. I went in there I started the fights, basically I had 20% more XP than I have right now at level 91 because I died once in each of those fights. And that was simply because I was just trying to tank things intentionally. But in the future, I go and do that fight. I know I just have to dodge one thing. It's really going to be easy to do those fights deathless, I think. They're actually a lot easier than I thought they would be. It could be because of 86 max all res. It could be because those fights are just a little bit easier than Maven to begin with. I'm not sure, but it felt pretty clean when I did those fights. So anyways, let's go ahead and showcase this synthesis map with the current setup of the build. I should note some of the other main big changes we made to the build before I get into this map is we do have gain charges on hit and use when full. Well, I don't have it for this flask net yet. I still need to get some more instilling orbs to get it on my granite flask, but I have it on my ruby, my diamond, and my quicksilver. And we're basically just rolling gain charges and then useful suffixes. And one of the most useful suffixes I think is very worth getting is buy a Of the Veiled Cinder Swallow. Try to get reduced mana costs. Currently, with the current setup of the build, I'm just so close to having the mana sustain that this one craft here puts you way over the edge. It takes your mana cost from being at 28, where we will end up start losing casts because we can't quite keep up with the mana sustain, where if we have Ruby Flask on, which we will have constant sustain on with the gain charges when hit because we just face tank everything, you suddenly don't have any mana problems and life is good. So that's just to showcase why you want to prioritize getting this. I was using the mana flask. I'm going to swap this mana flask out for a different flask I have planned, but I was using the mana flask and it was working fine, but this is just so much more consistent because it's always going to be up during a boss fight and you'll have no issues with mana then. So definitely recommend getting that change to the build. I have all the synthesis passives, so this should be a fairly, juice map. I guess we can check what the mods are. Shocked ground, which doesn't matter because we're immune to shock. Some monster attack and cast speed. Enemies take reduced crits, so they'll take less damage from me. I guess this isn't particularly as juicy as something like a Cortex. Those can roll maybe harder mods, but I did go ahead and I did get the passives for the synthesis stuff on the tree. So I know that stuff makes these maps a little bit harder, makes a little bit more stuff drop. So that would be the case for what's going on here if you get like particularly juicy mods. But for the most part, I'm pretty happy with how this build's turning out because we're extremely tanky. Small hits cannot pile up to kill us because of Aegis Aurora. We need to get a little bit of armor to start feeling really, really clean, really smooth, but already with this 86 max all res, it's super, super tanky for a league starter, and I'm really happy with how it's turning out. Alright, let's just go ahead and do this boss fight, and then I will probably call it for the day. Hopefully, this has been a good update for you guys. I wanted to share it with you because it's done so well for basically how much it's helped the build out in terms of single target and everything and tankiness. Hopefully this gives you a good showcase of like, we can basically just stand in things, we can chill, and it's all going to be okay. There's a lot of dangerous attacks these synthesis guys can do, but for the most part, especially when we start getting the max res a little bit higher and a little bit higher, we should be able to tank most of this stuff pretty consistently without worrying about it too much. Of course, Maven's popping off in the background, casting things on it, and we're just having a clean fight. It's not the best DPS. Spark in arenas like this, where it's super kind of spaced out, you're far away from a wall, you're not really getting as many like bonus hits on the boss. And I'm going to invest into that. I think I'm going to get more prod speed in the build. I might invest into some skill effect duration, or I might just do a gem swap when I really care about having extra good single target. But I'm pretty happy with it right now, being a level 19 gem, being we don't have a Nebulous yet. There's a lot of damage upgrades we can still get into the build, so I'm excited to do that, and they're not going to be like much higher expense than we already have in the build. So I'm very happy with how this build's performing. I guess I'll go ahead and identify this ring for the gamble of it, because it could be something good, right? We have buff effect and cold res, so that's probably not worth anything. I don't know. Anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thank you as always for watching. Take care, Exiles.